The first time I saw her, she wasn't moving. Not frozen, just still, in a way that made the rest of the park feel louder. The wind had pressed her hood tight against her face, and the sketchbook balanced on her knees looked ready to slip. People walked around her like she was part of the bench, something you didn't notice unless you had to clean it. A man in a pressed gray coat passed so close, his briefcase brushed her shoulder. He didn't look down. From where I stood on the sidewalk, I could see the lines she was making. Not random, measured, certain. But no one here cared. Behind me, the steel and glass facade of Northbridge Tower reflected the afternoon light. My building. My company's name etched into its lobby marble. I'd built that tower to be seen from half the city, but here was someone no one even saw from 5 feet away. Dad. I turned. Lily stood there, her backpack crooked on one shoulder, her face set in that careful expression she used at school neutral, in case anyone was watching. The kids spilling out of the Northside Academy gates behind her didn't notice her slip away. That was the thing about Lily lately. If you didn't look straight at her, you might not see her at all. She followed my gaze to the bench. "She's here almost every day," she said, voice low. "You know her?" "Not really. Just, she's always drawing." The girl on the bench shifted, pushing a strand of hair from her face. The tips were pale, probably from an old box of drugstore dye. Her coat sleeve was frayed. The stitching had pulled loose at the cuff. A gust sent a page sliding off her lap, curling toward the curb. A woman in heels stepped right over it. I should have stepped forward. Instead, I stood there. Lily didn't. She darted toward the paper, but a bike messenger wheeled between them. By the time she reached the curb, the page was plastered against the storm drain. She hesitated, glanced back at me, then let it go. We crossed to the car without speaking. The driver pulled away from the curb, and the park slid out of view. In the rearview mirror, I caught Lily still looking back. If you've ever been in a place where people acted like you weren't there, you'll understand this next part without me having to explain. You can share it if you want. Not for me, maybe for the person who's watching and thinks they're the only one who's been through it. Sometimes just knowing you're not the only one makes it easier to keep going. That night, the house felt bigger than it was. My phone buzzed with a late request from the office. I told them I'd review the proposal in the morning. In the kitchen, Lily was rinsing her dinner plate. "Dad? Yeah? There's this girl." She trailed off. "The one at the park. She's good. Really good. At drawing, I mean." I waited. She didn't go on. "She goes to school?" I asked. Lily shook her head. "I don't think so." Her tone had a weight to it, like she was telling me more than the words carried. But I let the silence stand. When she left the room, I stood at the sink for a while, staring out the window toward the street. People moved under the street lamps, shadows stretching and snapping back with each step. Somewhere, in that dark, I pictured a hood pulled up tight, a sketchbook open, the wind turning pages. If you've ever watched someone slip through the cracks, and you still remember their face, I'd like you to keep it in your mind for a while longer. And maybe stick around with me here. You might want to see what happened when someone finally stopped walking past. The next morning, the city looked the same, but I noticed something different. A thin stack of papers poking out of the trash can near the park bench. They were sketches, precise lines, clean perspective, drawn on paper that had been folded and refolded until the creases blurred the graphite. I didn't touch them. I just stood there long enough to see her sit down again, pull a pencil from her sleeve pocket, and start the next page. The streetlight above flickered once. She didn't look up, and for reasons I couldn't name yet, I did. A horn blared down the street, snapping me back before I realized how long I'd been standing there. My hands were still in my coat pockets, but the cold had worked its way past the fabric, numbing my fingers. The girl's pencil moved again, slow and steady, as if nothing outside that page mattered. By lunchtime, I was back in my office, but I couldn't keep my mind there. I'd looked over the site proposal 3 times without absorbing a single number. My assistant asked if I wanted lunch brought in. I told her I wasn't hungry. Across town, Lily sat in the cafeteria, picking at her food. Kids laughed at another table, loud enough to fill the whole room. She stood, slipped her tray into the bin, and walked out the side door without a glance from anyone. The hallways smelled faintly of bleach and pencil shavings. The back gate to Northside Academy opened onto the park. Lily hesitated just long enough to scan for the bench. Sophie was there. Always there. "You came," Sophie said, not looking up. "I had time," Lily replied, sliding onto the far end of the bench. Sophie tapped her paper with the eraser. "I'm working on this old building on Main. Bricks take forever." Lily leaned in. The lines were sharp, precise, better than anything she'd seen in her own art class. "You're really good." "Yeah, well, drawing doesn't cost anything. Paper's cheap if you know where to look." Sophie said it without bitterness, just a fact. They fell into a rhythm over the next week. Every lunch, Lily slipped out, and Sophie would show her something: how to block shapes before adding details, how to keep a horizon line straight without a ruler. Lily's drawing started to change. On the 4th day, Sophie split her sandwich with Lily without asking. Lily noticed it was the same kind of sandwich she'd been eating all week. 2 slices of white bread with a thin layer of peanut butter. No jelly. No extras. That Friday, the wind had a sharper bite. They huddled closer on the bench, pencils awkward in gloved hands. A jogger passed, glancing at Sophie with the same tight-mouthed look Lily had seen adults give her before. "You get that a lot?" Lily asked. "People staring?" Sophie shrugged. "Only when they think I'm not looking." Lily opened her mouth, then shut it. The air between them felt heavier. 2 days later, a teacher stopped Lily just before she reached the back door. "Lunch break is almost over. You've been leaving a lot lately." "I just need fresh air," Lily said. "Fresh air doesn't take 30 minutes, the teacher replied. Lily smiled politely, the way she'd seen her father do when ending a conversation he didn't want to have. She kept walking. By the time she reached the bench, Sophie was already sketching. "We've got less time today," Lily said, dropping her backpack. "Then you'd better learn faster," Sophie said, smirking. They bent over the page together. Traffic hummed across the street. Somewhere behind them, the school bell rang faintly. If you've ever found a place or a person that made you feel like you didn't have to explain yourself, you know what this meant for them. And maybe you've got your own story like that. You could share it here. Someone might need to hear it. As the shadows stretched across the park, Sophie pulled a folded sheet from her bag. "Here," she said, handing it over. Lily opened it to find a perfect drawing of Northside Academy. But in Sophie's version, a small figure stood on the front steps, holding a sketch pad. "That's you," Sophie said. "The way I see you." Lily looked down at the line, straight, clean, certain. Something warm settled in her chest. From the park entrance, a figure in a dark coat had stopped, watching them. Neither of them noticed. The man in the dark coat didn't move for a long moment. A breeze shifted the hem of his jacket as he stood near the park's entrance, gaze fixed on the 2 girls. Sophie didn't notice. She was busy adjusting Lily's grip on the pencil, guiding her wrist in short arcs. "You're pressing too hard," she said. "Let the line happen." Lily tried again, softer this time. "Like this? Closer." Sophie nodded. "You've got to see it before you put it down." Across the street, the man stepped back into the flow of pedestrians, disappearing in the crowd. The next day, Daniel left the office early. His staff assumed it was for a meeting, but he parked a block from the school, keeping to the far side of the street as Lily slipped out through the back gate. He watched her cross the park, sit on the bench, and leaned toward Sophie as if they'd known each other for years. Daniel stayed where he was, watching them talk, watching Lily laugh in a way she hadn't in weeks. He saw Sophie's coat, the frayed sleeve, the overworn shoes. He saw the brown paper bag that held her lunch, and he saw the way passers-by avoided looking at her. A delivery truck rumbled past, blocking his view for a few seconds. By the time it cleared, Lily was bent over a notebook, and Sophie's pencil was moving quickly, correcting her lines. It was methodical, focused. Daniel turned away before either of them saw him. That weekend, rain streaked the windows of the Hayes house. Daniel sat in his study, reviewing a set of blueprints. But his attention kept drifting. In the reflection on the glass, he saw Lily in the living room, sketchbook balanced on her knees. "You've been drawing a lot lately," he said, walking in. She looked up. "Yeah, your friend from the park, she teaching you?" Lily's expression shifted, wary. "Her name's Sophie." Daniel didn't respond right away. He took in the page she was working on, lines clean, proportions better than he remembered from her old school projects. "She's good," Lily said quietly. "I'm sure she is." Daniel's voice was even, but inside, something tightened. Monday came cold and clear. The park bench was damp from the night's rain, so they sat on the low wall instead. Sophie unrolled a sheet of paper that had been wrapped in a grocery bag. "It's the clock tower," she said. "Thought you might like it." Lily's eyes widened. "You drew this?" "Yeah. Took me 2 afternoons." Before Lily could respond, a shadow fell across the page. A man in a suit stood there, mid-50s, polished shoes, the kind of watch you didn't wear unless you wanted people to notice. "You girls shouldn't be out here by yourselves," he said, looking directly at Lily. "We're fine," Lily answered, a little sharper than she meant to. His gaze shifted to Sophie. "Do your parents know where you are?" Sophie didn't flinch. "Yeah, they know." The man gave a slow nod, then walked off. Sophie's pencil hovered above the paper, unmoving. "He didn't mean anything," Lily said. Sophie's lips pressed into a thin line. "Sure." That night, as Daniel locked up the office, he thought again about the way Sophie had met the man's stare without looking away. It wasn't defiance. It was something else. Something heavier. When he reached his car, he realized he was holding a folded page from his desk, a note he'd made earlier that read, "Find out about the girl in the park." He slipped it back into the folder. The next day, the park was quieter than usual. Fewer joggers, fewer dog walkers, just the two of them on the bench, a pencil moving steadily across paper. And someone, again, watching from a distance. The presence was subtle at first, a shape half hidden behind the bare branches, a silhouette that blended with the movement of the street. Sophie didn't look up, but Lily's pencil paused mid-line. "You see him too?" she asked, without turning her head. Sophie's eyes flicked toward the figure and back to the page. "Yeah. Don't worry about it." Lily kept drawing, but her hand was less steady. "Do you know him?" "Number." Sophie's tone was clipped, final. She shifted the paper slightly, using her shoulder as a shield against the wind and the gaze. Across the park, Daniel stepped out from the shadows. He'd been there the whole time. When Lily's eyes found him, she froze for just a second before looking back down at the page. "Dad?" she called across the distance. He crossed the grass slowly, his shoes damp from the morning frost. "Thought I'd see what's keeping you so busy at lunch." Sophie's posture stiffened. She closed the notebook halfway, her fingers tight on the edges. Daniel stopped a few feet away. "You must be Sophie." "Yeah," she said, without meeting his eyes. "I'm Daniel Hayes," he said, as if the name explained itself. In most situations, it did. Sophie only nodded. Lily spoke quickly. "She's been teaching me how to draw better." Daniel's gaze flicked from Lily's notebook to Sophie's. "You're good," he said. And it was true, clean lines, balanced composition, better than some interns he'd seen fresh out of college. Sophie gave the faintest shrug. It's just practice. Daniel wanted to ask more where she learned, what she wanted to do with it. But he could feel the tension in the air, tight as a pulled wire. Well, he said, don't let me interrupt. He stepped back, but the image stayed with him. That evening, Daniel found himself walking down Main Street after a meeting. The wind cut between the buildings, carrying the faint smell of roasted coffee and exhaust. He spotted Sophie before she spotted him standing near the library steps, flipping through a stack of worn papers. She noticed him and froze. Just heading home, he said, though it wasn't entirely true. Sophie shifted the stack under her arm. Library closes early tonight. You live nearby? She hesitated. Something like that. Daniel glanced at the rolled-up papers. You sell those? Sometimes. She looked past him toward the street, as if calculating the fastest way to leave. I might know people who'd pay for work like that, Daniel said carefully. Her shoulders lifted, then dropped. It's not for them. She started walking. 2 days later, Lily arrived at the bench with an extra sandwich. She placed it on the wood without comment. Sophie glanced at it, then at Lily. Thanks. They worked in silence for a while. The sound of pencil on paper was steady, almost meditative. At one point, Sophie leaned over Lily's page, her voice soft but certain. You see it now, right? The lines, where they meet. Lily nodded. Yeah. I see it. For the first time. Sophie smiled. Small, but real. If you've ever had someone show you a way of seeing the world that changes how you move through it, you know it's not something you forget. And maybe you've had that moment yourself. If you have, you could tell it here. Someone listening might be looking for their own reason to keep going. Daniel didn't go to the office the next day. He told his assistant he was working remotely, but he was parked 2 blocks from Northside Academy before the first lunch bell rang. From his spot, he could see the rhythm. Lily slipping out the side gate. Sophie already on the bench waiting, their heads bent over paper within seconds. It was always the same until it wasn't. Today, Sophie wasn't there. Lily hesitated by the bench, scanning the park. She checked the low wall, the corner by the bus stop. Nothing. She sat down, pulled out her notebook, and tried drawing alone. 10 minutes passed before Sophie appeared from the far end of the park. She was walking fast, hood up, clutching her sketchbook like she didn't want anyone to see it. You okay? Lily asked as soon as she sat. Yeah, Sophie said, but her voice was tighter than usual. Just had to be somewhere. Daniel, watching from a distance, noticed the small tear along the side of Sophie's coat. Hadn't been there yesterday. They got back to work, but the easy rhythm was gone. Sophie kept glancing toward the street, her pencil strokes quick and less precise. At one point, Lily reached over, steadying Sophie's hand. You're pressing too hard, she said, echoing Sophie's own words from before. Sophie looked at her for a long second, then eased her grip. Guess I am. That evening, Daniel was at his kitchen counter when Lily walked in. She was late today, Lily said, setting her bag down. Your friend? Yeah. Something's wrong. Daniel kept his tone neutral. She tell you what? Number. But, Lily trailed off, frustrated. She's different when she's not drawing, like she's somewhere else. Daniel set down his glass. People carry things they don't talk about. Maybe they'd talk if someone asked, Lily said, her voice sharper than she meant. The next afternoon, Daniel crossed the street toward the bench. Sophie's eyes narrowed slightly when she saw him. Mind if I sit? He asked. She didn't say yes, but she didn't move either. You're good at this, Daniel said, nodding toward her sketch. It's just lines, Sophie replied. It's more than that. She didn't answer, focusing on the paper. Daniel tried again. If you had the right supplies, more time. I've got what I need. Sophie cut in, her tone final. Lily shifted uncomfortably. Daniel recognized the look on Sophie's face, one he'd seen in clients, just before they walked away from a deal. Later, in his study, Daniel stared at the blueprints on his desk, but kept seeing Sophie at that bench, shoulders squared, refusing to lean on anyone. It reminded him of someone he used to know, someone who'd learned early not to wait for help. The next morning, he made a decision. It wasn't about charity. It wasn't about guilt. It was about not walking past anymore. Daniel showed up at the park before lunch, leaning against the low wall near the bench. He'd left his tie in the car, rolled his sleeves, trying not to look like he was here on business. When Sophie arrived, her steps slowed. "You're early," she said. "I wanted to talk," Daniel replied. She hesitated, eyes narrowing slightly. "About what?" He gestured to the sketchbook under her arm. "About what you can do, and what it might be worth if people saw it. I told you I'm not selling to them." "I'm not talking about selling to them," Daniel said evenly. "I'm talking about people who'd value it. People who'd see you." Sophie's gaze flicked away. "People see what they want." Daniel didn't push. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small roll of thick, high-grade drawing paper. "If you want better lines, try this. No strings." She took it slowly, like it might vanish. "Why?" "Because I've walked past too many people I should have stopped for." They sat in silence for a while, the paper between them. When Lily arrived, she noticed it instantly. "That's new." Sophie gave a half smile. "Guess I'm trying it out." Over the next week, the change was subtle. Sophie's drawings grew sharper, cleaner. She still kept her guard up, but sometimes, between the lines, she let something slip, a story about a building she used to pass, a laugh that came without warning. Daniel stopped watching from a distance. He sat with them, sometimes talking, sometimes just listening to the scratch of pencils. One afternoon, Sophie slid a finished piece across the bench toward him. It was the Northbridge Tower, his building drawn from the park, but with people filling the space around it. Kids playing, vendors, couples leaning into each other. Life, where he'd only thought about glass and steel. "This is how you see it?" Daniel asked. "This is how it could be," Sophie replied. Something shifted then. Not just in the drawing, but in him. If you've ever had someone quietly change the way you see your own world, you know it doesn't go back to how it was. And maybe you've been that person for someone else. If you have, you know why it matters. The wind moved through the park, rattling the branches overhead. Daniel looked at Sophie, then at Lily, both bent over their pages. He didn't say it out loud, but the decision was already made. He wasn't walking past anymore. The sun had dipped low enough to throw long shadows across the park when Sophie packed her pencils away. She stood, tucking the sketch of Northbridge Tower carefully into her bag. "You heading out?" Daniel asked. "Yeah," she said. "Got a place I need to be." Lily zipped her own backpack. "See you tomorrow?" Sophie hesitated. "We'll see." Daniel watched her cross the street, slipping into the steady stream of pedestrians until she disappeared around the corner. He wasn't sure why it bothered him so much that she could vanish that quickly. The following day, Sophie didn't show. Lily sat on the bench alone, flipping through her sketchbook, her mood heavy. "She's not just skipping," she murmured, more to herself than to Daniel. By the third day, he decided to find her. The library steps were empty. The small diner 2 blocks away had never heard of her. At the community center, a volunteer said they'd seen her a few times, but didn't know her last name. Finally, late that afternoon, he spotted her sitting on the back steps of a shuttered hardware store, sketchbook balanced on her knees. "You've been hard to find," Daniel said. Sophie looked up, not startled. "That's kind of the point. You don't have to disappear." She smirked faintly. "You say that like it's a choice." Daniel leaned against the railing, choosing his words carefully. "You've got talent. Real talent. I've got space, an actual studio in my building. It's empty most days. You could work there. No one to push you out. No one looking the other way. Sophie closed her sketchbook slowly. And what do you want for it? Nothing you can't give, he said. Just keep drawing. For a moment, she searched his face for the catch. Whatever she saw made her look away. I'll think about it, she said, standing. 2 mornings later, Sophie walked into the lobby of Northbridge Tower, hood down, eyes scanning the high ceilings, like they didn't belong to the same city as the park. Daniel met her by the elevator. "It's yours," he said, when the doors opened on the studio floor. Light flooded the room from wide windows. Tables stood empty, waiting. Sheets of clean paper were stacked neatly. Pencils lined in rows. Sophie set her bag down slowly, like testing whether the floor would hold. She touched one of the sheets, then glanced at Daniel. "Guess I'll need to see what it looks like when the lines are straight." "You've already been doing that," he said. The corner of her mouth lifted, just barely, and without another word, she began to draw. The sound of graphite on paper filled the studio, steady and sure. Sophie worked like someone making up for lost timelines, flowing fast, then slowing as she measured angles with her eyes. Daniel stood near the window, watching the way the light moved across the page. She didn't glance up once, as if the rest of the room had vanished. Lily arrived after school, stepping into the studio with the wide-eyed wonder of someone who'd walked into another world. "This is where you've been?" she asked Sophie. "Guess so," Sophie replied without pausing. "It's different here." Lily wandered the space, fingertips brushing the tables, eyes taking in the stacks of paper, the neatly lined pencils. "Feels like you could make anything here." Sophie's pencil lifted for just a second. "Maybe." Daniel leaned against the far table, letting them talk. It wasn't just the room. It was the air between them now, lighter than he'd ever seen it. By the end of the week, Sophie had filled half a portfolio. Streets, buildings, people each drawing alive with the same precision she'd shown in the park, but now there was something else in them. Space. Openness. Daniel noticed she no longer kept her bag on her lap when she worked. She left it on the table beside her, trusting it would still be there when she looked. One afternoon, Lily pulled Daniel aside while Sophie cleaned up. "She's different," she whispered. "Like she's not waiting for something bad to happen anymore." Daniel nodded. "Sometimes all it takes is not having to look over your shoulder." Sophie walked over then, holding out a fresh page. "For you," she said. It was the park bench. Empty, but drawn in such a way that it didn't feel lonely, just waiting. Daniel took it, feeling the weight of it more than the paper should allow. "Thank you," Sophie shrugged. "Just lines." But there was a faint warmth in her voice that hadn't been there before. If you've ever seen someone start to believe they have a place, you know it changes the air around them. And maybe you've been part of that for someone. If you have, you'll understand why some moments stay with you, even when the paper fades. The city lights began to come on outside the windows. Lily sat beside Sophie, sketching her own version of the tower's view. Daniel stayed a little longer than he needed to, just watching them work. There was no plan for what came next. But for the first time in a long while, that didn't feel like a problem. The winter wind was sharper now, even from inside the tower. Sophie's studio had become a kind of second home, though she never called it that. She arrived most mornings before Lily's classes started, left after the streets had emptied. One evening, as Daniel stepped out of the elevator, he found her standing by the window, sketchbook closed, looking down at the park below. The bench was barely visible in the dim light, a shadow against the snow. "You miss it?" he asked. Sophie didn't turn. "Sometimes. It's where I learned to be invisible." Daniel moved to stand beside her. "And here?" She hesitated. Here. I'm not sure yet. He didn't push for more. 2 days later, Lily burst into the studio with a flyer in her hand. There's an art competition, she said, breathless. Statewide. Winners get their work shown downtown. You should enter. Sophie's eyes dropped to the paper. Not my thing. You'd win, Lily insisted. It's not about winning, Sophie said quietly. Daniel could see the wall going up again, the same one he'd seen in the park that first week. You've got the work, he said evenly. If you want in, I'll cover the entry fee. No conditions. Sophie slid the flyer back toward Lily. Thanks, but no. That night, Daniel sat in his study long after the house was quiet. He thought about all the deals he'd pushed through in his career, all the times he'd convinced someone to take a risk. This wasn't about persuasion, this was about trust. And trust couldn't be forced. The next morning, Sophie was already at the table when he arrived. She didn't look up when she spoke. If I did enter, you can't be there when they judge. Deal? Daniel allowed himself a small smile. Deal. The weeks that followed were different. Sophie worked with a focus Daniel hadn't seen before, filling page after page with scenes from the city, not as it was, but as she saw it. Open spaces, faces turned toward each other instead of away, streets that felt safe to walk. When the competition day came, she dropped off her portfolio without ceremony. She didn't tell Lily the time, didn't invite Daniel. The results came a week later. First place. Daniel found out from Lily, who was grinning so hard she could barely speak. Sophie, when she finally told him herself, just said, "Guess they saw something." The exhibition night was cold, the kind of cold that made the city lights feel sharper. Sophie stood in the gallery, hands in her pockets, while people moved from frame to frame. She didn't hover near her own work. She didn't have to. Daniel watched from across the room as a woman in a long coat stopped in front of Sophie's drawing of the park bench. The woman tilted her head, then smiled small, like she'd found something she recognized. Sophie noticed, and for just a second, she let herself smile back. Later, as they stepped out into the night, Daniel asked, "So, what now?" Sophie looked down the street, where the glow of the park lights cut through the dark. "Keep drawing, I guess." Lily looped her arm through Sophie's. "Good." Daniel fell into step beside them. The air was cold, but it didn't seem to touch them, and without saying it, he knew they were all thinking the same thing. They weren't walking past anymore. I don't know the exact moment it happened, when watching from a distance stopped being enough. Maybe it was the way she kept her head down in the park. Maybe it was how Lily's voice changed when she talked about her. Or maybe it was just that I'd spent too many years building things that looked solid but had nothing inside. I used to think I was good at seeing people. Now I know I was just good at noticing the ones who were already hard to miss. Sophie changed that. It wasn't dramatic. No big speeches. No sudden turning point. Just a quiet shift, day by day, until the space between us was gone. She's still drawing. Lily's still learning. And me, I've stopped walking past. That's enough.